Okay, so we're now going to talk about what PHP is actually used for, and we're going to go ahead and, as you can see, look at some real life examples. So as we've already learned, PHP is used for creating dynamic websites, and basically what that means is websites that aren't served statically. They're not just markup and styles that have been served to you as a user. You can interact with them, you can enter information, store information, retrieve information that perhaps other people have stored, and Facebook's a good example of this. Now Facebook is actually built with PHP, so it just goes to show you how powerful and popular this language actually is. With such a massive platform like Facebook, you can see that PHP can easily cope with that kind of pressure, probably with a little bit of tweaking and obviously sensible writing of code and using different servers to handle things, but generally PHP is there to cope with things like this. So thinking about Facebook as an example, what does a website like Facebook need? Well, it needs a few things. It needs a template, which you can see, this has been output. This is just the home screen, the login page, or sign up. And obviously there are lots of other different styles of elements. We've already seen how we can just output styles or output markup, and we can include a doc type, a head, and we can link a style sheet. We already know that we can do this, so that's not a problem. We can mix PHP in with our template. What's also required is data stored in a database. So this sort of comes onto working with software like MySQL. Now MySQL is a very popular database solution for storing data using SQL, which is structured query language. So for example, this allows you to say, for example, if I was to go ahead and log in here, if I go ahead and enter my email address and my password and I click submit or log in, what this would do is it would go to the database, and this would sort of have the layer of PHP in between it. So it would hit PHP. PHP would use maybe PDO, which is a database wrapper, or it would use MySQLi, which is an extension for PHP that allows you to access database data. It would go and fetch that information. It would compare my email address or my username and my password, and it would go ahead and log me in. And that brings us on to the third point, which is the ability to store user sessions. And this is another probably fundamental point of a dynamic website where you have to log in. Users should be able to sign in, and this is with credentials that are stored in the database. Now luckily all of this functionality is already built into PHP, so you can already do all of these things without having to go and install separate things. You may want to use a PHP framework or something like that, but generally you have everything here. And luckily PHP is making it easier to make secure websites. So for example, password hashing is a massive importance when you're dealing with storing password information in a database. If your database is compromised by whatever reason, things like that do happen, you'd want to keep your passwords hashed, which means that they can't be read as plain text, and they can't be changed back into plain text because they're a hash. They're not necessarily reversible. So PHP does have a sort of reputation for being not insecure as such. It's just because it doesn't enforce security, so you have to be clever in the way you write code for it to be secure. So there are lots of security considerations as well. So there are other platforms that use PHP, popular platforms. WordPress is a good example because if you can go ahead and download WordPress and take a look at the source code, which will give you an insight into how this is built with PHP. So this is built on PHP as well, and websites like Flickr, amongst millions and millions of other websites as well. So there are lots of websites that use PHP. But what about PHP on the command line? Now, we're not going to be looking at that in this series, but it's important to understand that it can also be run in this way. So independent from PHP is independent from any web server, really. It doesn't have to have a web server to run on. It's more than likely that you're wanting to build a website and work with PHP in that way, and create a cool website that has different functionality. but it can be run on the command line. So bear in mind that it's not necessarily something that's just installed on a server and then used just for that purpose. When you see someone maybe, I don't know, typing on the command line with PHP, you'll then understand why it's being run on the command line, because it can be. So PHP can be used to build dynamic websites like blogs. So for a blog, you would want to store blog posts. You would want to maybe have a back-end admin panel to moderate these. It can be used for social websites. So a social website really is a perfect example, because you go ahead and it sort of contains all the functionality you'd expect from a dynamic website. You'd sign in, so then you'd hit a database, you'd go ahead and maybe update your status, upload an image. So PHP does contain the functionality to upload files, so you can go ahead and upload images as well. You can go ahead and sign in like we've already talked about. You can go ahead and just store data from a database or retrieve data. So if you just think about a social network, you have different connections. So, you know, I go ahead and create an account. All I'm really doing is storing my details in a database somewhere. Let's say your friend goes and creates an account as well. All they're doing is storing their details in a database as well. When you become friends with that person on a social network, all you're doing is creating another data entry point to say that your record, let's say your record 1 and their record 2, so uniquely identified, all you're doing is you're creating a connection between them two records. So you're saying 1 and 2 are connected. So that means that when I log on, using the functionality we've already discussed, I see everyone who I'm connected with data from the database. So it all seems very real and it all feels like real life, but behind the scenes it's actually just storing data into a database. You know, there's nothing real about it in a sense. The only thing that's real is the actual content. But obviously PHP doesn't have to be used for full-scale websites like this. If, for example, you just wanted to, you know, create a website, maybe for your business or something like that, and you wanted to create a poll or a little comment system or even an image gallery, you can go ahead and do that by just creating, you know, small snippets of PHP code and including them in your website to then be served to the user. So a poll is obviously dynamic functionality. This would store data. A comment system is the same. But in an image gallery, for example, you might just want to say, well, I just want to bung all of my, you know, images or my photography into a folder, and I want PHP to grab this, spit it out on the page for me, and then, you know, apply some kind of JavaScript lightbox functionality or gallery plugin to it, maybe using something like jQuery. So it can be used for massive websites, or it can be used for small little widgets. But in a nutshell, that's what PHP is used for. And we've spoken about, you know, actually serving content, but also looking at the connection between your server, PHP, and a database solution like MySQL, so you can store data, retrieve it to create massive websites, if you like Facebook, that rely on this. If you take a minute to imagine what Facebook would be like if it wasn't dynamic, you'd literally just be served with static files, and there'd be no need for it because you wouldn't be able to interact with it, store data and retrieve data. So that's basically what PHP is used for.